What is up, guys? Welcome to the Meaning of Podcast. I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite directors and the deeper meaning within their films. And as you guys can see or hear, things are going to be a little different because quarantine is the real deal. We are currently transmitting via our locations, wherever we are. Because the California quarantine is it's real and people are taking it seriously, and we are taking it seriously, and we want to show that you guys should also take it seriously. So
Definitely.
for the time being, this is how we're gonna sound in here, at least for the foreseeable future. Hopefully not for too long, and we can get back to the studio and be a little bit more on the same page as far as how we see each other. But for now, we're gonna have to see each other like this. But thankfully, RB3 set this whole thing up. He's the master genius behind this, and he is in charge of all this jazz. So give it up for him, RB3. And
Trying.
yeah, and times are crazy, but I'm excited because this episode we're doing a director, RB3, and we're doing one that you like a lot, and I know Sabrina
Yeah.
likes a lot, and that's Sofia Coppola. And I'm excited for this episode because I know you guys are big fans of hers, and I want to start out right away with you, RB3. Tell me why you're such a big fan of hers.
I'm a huge fan of Sofia Coppola. I've been a big fan of hers since, watching a lot of her early filmography when I was in late high school, early college. Obviously, she comes from this family of royalty, the Coppola family. Obviously, Francis Ford Coppola. Many credit him as being one of the greatest directors, one of the most forward-thinking directors in the early '70s cinema movement. Um, she's the byproduct of that. And in her own way, she's been a revolutionary filmmaker in the sense of driving popularity and a lot more conversation towards female direction in films. So I'm a huge fan.
Sabrina, being a fan of Sofia
Yes.
Coppola, tell me about it.
Yeah, I grew up, of course, like I'm just really happy that we're highlighting another female filmmaker this month. That makes me really excited because I don't know, growing up, we've had this conversation a ton, but there's not a lot of female filmmakers to really look up to as much, and ones that are as highly regarded as she is. Especially growing up, of course, being a Coppola, she's Hollywood royalty. It's nepotism at its finest. It's one that used her position to create really great art. I mean, she has such a specific style that I really, really admired when I was young. The light pastels, the dreaminess, the way the frames looked like artwork, and the way I found her was on Tumblr. People would be just posting stills from some of her movies, and so that's how I got into The Virgin Suicides. I read the book before I made myself watch the movie, and then got into the movie, and that one is still one of my favorites and had a really big impact on my childhood. So yeah, love that we're talking about her today.
And I kind of want to stay with you just because we've had conversations like outside of this, talking to me about not having a lot of female directors or female artists in the Hollywood industry to kind of, model after or look up to. But it's safe to
Yeah.
say Sofia Coppola is definitely one of them. She's been one of the most prominent female directors in Hollywood. What does she mean personally to you on a personal level?
Yeah, it was one of those beautiful examples of uh, the artistry that goes into filmmaking. I think the way she approaches filmmaking, really like character driven. The shots she uses. I mean, it's just like she's so like visually profound. She kind of says so much about a character and about the story just by the atmosphere she creates. And so that's something I really love. I was talking to you guys about this. I modeled my childhood bedroom when I was like 14 or 15 after the Virgin Suicides. It was just like all floral and like pastels. So just her as a female filmmaker looking up to someone as creative and as intelligent as she is in this field. It's very inspiring, and it's very, I love Sofia Coppola.
That's cool because I feel like
Hmm.
we talked about her being Hollywood royalty, and it's
Hmm.
one of those things. She is probably I consider to be the most prominent female director in Hollywood today, at least currently. I
Hmm.
mean, she's got some of the largest filmography that we have of any female director currently, and she's made some of the most substantial films as far as Academy Awards and as far as getting attention and recognition. Is it safe to say that she is the most prominent female director? I mean, I feel like when I think female director, I think Sofia Coppola, RB3.
Well, she's definitely. I mean, she's one of the four female directors who've been nominated for the Academy Award of Best Director. I believe she was the second. I believe it was Jane Champion who was the first, and then she was the second for Lost in Translation, and ultimately Catherine Bigelow won for The Hurt Locker. So I think I probably put both Catherine Bigelow and Sofia Coppola up there as like the two
Yes.
goats. And then we just recently had our throwback of Catherine Bigelow's films, our making of episode of that too. So it's she's definitely up there too. Ava DuVernay is a bigger name now, but I think throughout a lot of Hollywood, especially through the late '90s, early 2000s, Sofia Coppola is holding down the guard for top tier female talent. And then that's not to say, that's not to disrespect the work of like Nora Ephron or Nancy Myers, who like were big in like the romantic comedy scene. But in terms of I think like Academy Award acclaim and mainstream attention, Sofia Coppola had a lot of that more than probably most other female directors.
Yeah, I think something her visual style is something we kind of see like emulated throughout other female filmmakers' work. I could get into it a little bit later on, but I definitely see like certain similarities between Gerwig's style in Little Women and Sofia Coppola's with the Virgin Suicides, just in terms of color palette. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but it is really cool to have somebody. We're talking about Gerwig leading the charge of currently right now, but it's cool to have Sofia Coppola kind of starting that a little bit early on.
Absolutely. And obviously you mentioned her visual style and how
Mhm.
prominent that is. We can't go without mentioning that she went to Cal Arts, first of all, to study painting, and then eventually she went into photography, and that is seen in all her films. She is obsessed
Yeah.
with visual storytelling and collaborating with her DPs to create something that's truly visually captivating. And that comes from her photography background for sure. And a lot of it comes from framing. Her framing is like very key and important in pretty much every single one of her films. And it's interesting because you could see that style that she brings into each and every one of her films. That is a very much a visuals first, everything else second kind of style from her directing perspective, which I love, to be honest. And I think a lot of that comes
Mhm.
from the color palette and also from the framing, and her collaborations with her DPs are just really stellar. It's incredible work. And obviously she shoots pretty much all her movies on film, besides Bling Ring, I believe, which is another thing that has to be said because, again, her photography background is pretty prominent. But I think we should get into it right away. Her first feature film is The Virgin Suicides, I believe, 1999, and you see all of that. I believe I might be wrong, but I feel like you see everything in her films just with her first feature, which is kind of incredible. Talk to me about the Virgin Suicides. I'll go back to you, Sabrina, just because I know this one means a lot to you. I know it's based. Is
Yeah.
it based on a novel?
Yeah, it's based on a novel.
Okay.
Yeah, one of my favorite novels. I mean, just from the title card, we get that feeling right away. We get that youth, that dreaminess, that just like I don't know, being like a girl. And because the title card is just basically like it looks like little doodles. It's just a bunch of little like the Virgin Suicides kind of looking like notebook doodles you do at school. So that's really cool. And even just like it opens up with this like warm and vibrant view of like suburbia. And then it immediately cuts to you get right from the beginning because then it cuts to this like desaturated, cold, darker shot of the one of the youngest sister in like a bathtub. And so we get that right away, right from the beginning. Yeah. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
RB3.
Yeah, this was I feel like one of the quintessential early like or late '90s films that I think this and American Beauty both kind of
Mhm.
they both came out in the same year, but they all kind of touched on the same theme of like suburbia, right? And like the boredom that comes with suburbia and like what that um, theme of like upper middle class kind of represents and a community and especially within the youth. I think that's a constant theme that we see throughout in the entirety of her filmography, just from different perspectives. Virgin Suicides dealt with, middle class 1950s teenagers. Somewhere deals with a Somewhere is a movie that deals with a Hollywood actor. The Big Owl deals with women in post Civil War, after at the end of the Civil War. So it all kind of deals with this like whole idea of like containment and what how how normal Americana, how suburbia just kind of gives us this like urgency for like imagination and just like trying to escapism essentially. So it deals with a really fascinating theme that I think again, like we talked about in our Sam and E's episode with American Beauty, I think this
Mhm.
something like Virgin Suicides represents something pre 9/11 than post 9/11. I think a lot of American life changed post that time period, and we kind of had a different outlook on what life represented during that time, you know, compared to the late '90s, early '90s to late '90s to where we are now in society. So it's just interesting and it's different, and you know, and it just deals with so many other things outside of class and outside of boredom. It deals with things of feminism, femininity, like all of these huge worldly topics, and it's a really great film.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
especially like
interesting.
feminine.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Especially like femininity with like adolescents and with like teenagers. It's something that she deals with a lot in the Virgin Suicides and kind of like what it means to be a girl growing up and how you behave and how you dress and how you act. And then especially with these sisters, the Lisbon sisters that we're focused on, that kind of isolation that they have because their parents are strict and how they kind of are breaking out of that little like mold in their own ways and like rebellion, things like that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's really interesting. Obviously, the film premiered at Sundance, which says a lot already because it kind of shows the direction that Sofia Coppola is headed, right? She's headed down this path of like art house, indie style kind of
Mhm.
film that she kind of does in pretty much every one of her movies that she never kind of steers away from as far as genre films. But I feel like it's interesting because her movie has a lot to deal with perspective and especially female perspective. But this one also has a lot of like the creepy boys perspective. I don't know if you
Yeah,
guys remember
Yeah.
that during rewatching this
Mhm.
movie or watching this movie, which I find to be kind of interesting since she is like notably a female director with a lot of female leads. Um, that's one thing that stood out to me that I don't think she really gets back into any other of her films. I mean, she might obviously, but I feel like that's a big key in her first film. And obviously, the second thing that stands out to me is the color palette, the aesthetic. It's very. I mean, I think someone said it's very Terrence Malick as far as the 1973 Badlands. It has that kind of feel of
yeah.
like you said, RB3, Old Town Suburbia, Americana, lots of colors, lots of different styles. Outfits are key. This is something that she does in pretty much every single one of her films, but that really stood out to me, and especially the whole POV thing, because I know she likes to do that a lot, and we see that eventually with Lost in Translation, which I don't want to get
Mhm.
into just yet, but it shows her focus on characters or a character kind of outside looking, towards something, towards a subject, whether it's the
Yeah,
creepy boys looking at the
and
girls or the girls looking at something that they could have but can't have.
all the cinematography and production design lends to that perspective. Like the all of the like Sabrina mentioned, like the switching from bright palettes to a darker color palette that represents the suicide. It shows the all of the palettes and all the production design and colors and cinematography all go along and match with the emotion that's being expressed on screen. So it's just really fascinating how she's able to take all of these different tools in filmmaking. And that's not also to mention the music too, which is I think another big part of it is done by I think a French group or French band Air, and I think the music just stands out in this movie too because it all adds to that kind of soft suburban
Mhm.
mentality. You see all throughout it.
Definitely, yeah. Something I really admire about her cinematography is that handheld camera work that she does that kind of like creates that intimacy with the characters, even if they
Right.
are a little distant characters and we don't understand them fully. It's almost like it's almost like we are a little bit closer to them in that way.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I mean, this film is definitely significant for many reasons. I like that you brought up American Beauty RB3 because you're right. That's very in the same vein,
Mhm.
in the same style, and it was the same year, which is kind of crazy. But this kind of it's a great first feature, to be honest. It's a really good first
Mhm.
feature, and it's a great starting point to see all the themes and styles that she kind of delivers in each and every one of her other films. Any last words on this one? Because I know it might mean more to you guys than it does to me, so I want to make sure you guys get the last word.
Yeah, as you guys probably know, I really love like writing and I love screenplays and all of that kind of stuff. And it just stands out to me how like authentic and like sorrowful and like angsty this one is. When the doctor says like you're not even old enough to know how bad life gets. And then the first
Mhm.
youngest sister, after she attempts to commit suicide, she says, obviously you've never been a 13-year-old girl. That's just that stuff stands out to me so much, and I feel like that says so much about this movie, and just from that interaction, we get the entirety of basically, like, the motive of the Lisbon sisters, like, how they act, like, the reason why they are the way that they are, so I really love that one. Just
Yeah,
wanted to point that out.
and it goes to show the importance of having a female director, right?
Mhm.
Because so many people say, "Oh, it would be the same if a man directed it," and I always come back with like, "Nah, it wouldn't be," because you
No.
don't get moments like that from an actor, from a screenplay. You just don't get it unless you have that female director behind the camera
Mhm.
doing that
Mhm.
kind of interaction. Yeah, RB3. Any last words?
No, I'm just a huge fan of this movie. Again, big splash at Sundance and competed in the Cannes Film Festival as well. And I think it just goes to show the talent, the early talent that Sofia Coppola possessed.
Mhm.
Yeah, I believe her next film is Lost in Translation, right?
Yeah.
2 for 2.
That's wild. I mean, this movie obviously is a very popular movie. It won, I believe, 4 Academy Awards. I might be wrong. But either
Something of
way,
that, yeah.
Bill Murray, Scarlett Johansson, this is a pretty stacked cast even with just those 2. And
Hmm.
the first thing I
Yeah.
wanna ask you guys is, do you think this movie holds up?
Sabrina?
I It does for me. It does for
Okay.
me. But I could get that it's not like every single person's cup of tea, but I think it's incredibly slow paced, and I think it's done with a purpose. I think that adds that like rawness and that authenticity that she's going for with a story like this. Um, it highlights the isolation and like loneliness that like people could feel, and so that's why to me it still does. Why does it not for you?
RB3?
Um, well, I personally have always enjoyed this movie.
Okay.
I can get why a lot of people, I have heard that criticism a lot. Does it still hold up? I've heard that. I mean, not I've heard that a lot, but I've heard a lot of people. That's been a dialogue about this movie for quite some time. It's like the Juno effect, right? Like everybody loved Juno when it first came out, and then after they realized, oh, maybe Juno's not the greatest. Again, I love Juno, and I love
I
this
love
movie.
Juno.
Yeah, I do too.
I
But
do
I
too.
think
I love
people,
Juno too.
yeah,
Yeah, I didn't
I
know
think
people
Frank
actually said that.
no, no, no. I mean, it's it's just what people. And then I personally enjoy this movie too. I mean, I think that what they're trying to go for in terms of the
Yeah,
theme of like a fading movie star, like it's like trapped in like this foreign country. I mean, it does represent a lot of themes that are kind of outdated today.
yeah,
In terms of like frankly, just like with seemingly like cultural boredom, right? Like when you're in
Mhm,
this entirely exotic country, but you're so rich and so privileged that you disregard that and focus more on like isolation and loneliness. I mean, that's something that Sofia Coppola's whole career has been kind of mired in criticism for with a lot of her films. We're going to talk about The Beguiled later, but I remember being in film school and having intense dialogues and discussions about The Beguiled and how people felt about that movie because of what it represented. But I mean, honestly, her movies obviously also come from herself and her own representation. I mean, she was at one point. I mean, she's the daughter. I'm sorry, she's the daughter of one of the greatest directors of all time. So she's probably personally felt a lot of these moments of like traveling the world with her father and just feeling completely out of place. That's probably something she translated here. And then to go back to your awards thing, obviously translated in a lot of awards. It did win one Academy Award and was nominated for 4. It won Best Original Screenplay and it was nominated for Screenplay, Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor in Bill Murray. So people love this movie when it came out, and it obviously has the Hollywood connection too. But I think at the end of the day, it's just just a piece of cinema that people value.
I think something has to be said as far as you can still enjoy and love a movie as much and still be able to point out things that maybe don't work or maybe it shouldn't have been said or shouldn't have been put that way. I'm speaking for my Japanese brothers, yo. Yo, shout out to
Yeah,
my
yeah.
Japanese brothers out there. We love you
Whoop,
guys.
whoop.
I mean, there's a few scenes that they seem a little bit not cool in these movies, in this movie. So it's like, oh. but
Yeah.
I think it's still okay to appreciate the artistry of this movie. Like you said, RB3, I was wrong. I said it won 4. It was 4 nominated, won 1, which is screenplay, which is
Hmm.
her. I mean, she won an Oscar for screenplay. That's a huge deal. A
Right,
female director, a female writer winning a screenplay. That's
right.
something that can't be ignored. The second
Hmm.
thing
Hmm.
that can't be ignored is this movie is just visually stunning. It's
Hmm.
gorgeous. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful movie. And
Right.
again, that comes from her. That comes from her collaboration with her DP. That comes from her photography background, her framing, her color, her use of color, her use of lighting is pretty incredible throughout this entire movie.
Too
And
much.
and I feel like that's something to be given credit to because that's everything inside this movie is the way that we struggle to communicate with other people. When we have that struggle, we can use visuals to communicate. And the irony, it's almost meta that she's doing that with this movie, where it's like you don't understand certain things.
Mhm.
So she uses the visuals and the silence of just visuals coming at you as a way to communicate messages and themes inside the movie. So in a way, she's still a genius for doing that, and I have to give her credit for that. And that's kind of interesting the way
Right.
she uses visual storytelling as the key
Yeah.
to this movie.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I really, really love about this movie is the parallels between this one and her. If you guys have noticed,
Mm,
with a lot of the
right.
shots, a lot of the things, I love that connection with these two movies because, to my knowledge, they were married, Spike Jonze and Sofia Coppola, and so
Yeah.
they kind
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
I don't know so much if Lost in Translation is. I would have to look at the years to see if it matched up, but I know Spike Jonze modeled a lot of her after his relationship with Sofia Coppola. So I think that's a really cool thing, and I think that like a double feature with these two movies is kind of like a little perfect quarantine date night with yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
Especially with all of this everything that's happening in the world right now and kind of having this like isolation and loneliness and just like being inside. I don't know why
Yeah,
I'm definitely revisiting it sometime this week.
and you get Scarlet
Um,
in both. Yeah,
yeah, that's
Exactly.
true.
Yeah.
color slamming in
Yeah.
your
Yeah, the
face, all
color.
that color.
Well, speaking to the color palette and the visuals of this movie, I read here. I just read somewhere that, or at least on IMDb trivia, that Francis Ford Coppola actually urged Sofia Coppola to shoot this on video on digital back in like 2000 when that was early on. That's when George Lucas was really advocating for it.
Mhm.
And then she chose to shoot it on film because she felt that that would be a more romantic format to shoot this
Yeah.
movie on, which you could totally see throughout. And moreover, I think when you talk about the style and the appeal that this movie has had, just for cinema watchers and cinema goers throughout history, is that it did introduce us to the talent of Scarlett Johansson. It did introduce us to the kind of style of Sofia Coppola, like towards a more mainstream audience, and it also um, gave a different, unique perspective on Bill Murray, who's traditionally a comedic talent, who translated more into dramatic, transitioned more into a dramatic kind of role here that
Mhm.
was outside of his niche. So it does go to paint multiple different portrayals of like things we became familiar with over the years. So I was really excited to see that.
This is definitely another one, same example as the Virgin Suicides, where she has that handheld cinematography, and it's just so intimate. The way it just like will it'll do a long take and it'll kind of track around Scarlett Johansson as she's just sitting there
Mm.
alone. It's something that
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like
is
very
very, very,
naturalistic.
mhm, very, very beautiful. And then again, with you saying that she chose to shoot it on film, even though her father urged her not to, I think, yeah, with that like romantic kind of lens that she's looking through, that really, really elevates the film because of that.
Do you guys have a favorite shot in this movie? Because we keep talking about framing. Any
Mhm.
favorite shots that you guys remember?
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson, sitting down, like, against the window, and you could see the city. Yeah, of
Yeah, I
course.
know exactly what
Love
you're
that
talking about.
one.
It's
That is
classic.
so
It's Ghost in the
beautiful.
Shell. It's Ghost in the
Yeah.
Shell. I'm saying it. If you
Show,
guys have seen
just
Ghost in
in
the
the
Shell,
show.
that's from Ghost in the Shell. But it's a beautiful shot. It's so good. I love it.
Yeah.
Again, Japan. It's a
Yeah.
Right,
Japanese movie. Just kidding.
right. No, I definitely I definitely go to the final shot, um the whole mystery of what Bill Murray whispered into her ear at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I definitely I appreciate that one for sure. So
yeah.
I also want to mention too that this movie supposedly, had a lot that was written on a script level, but that they actually ended up improvising a lot of the lines that they see in this movie. So it's good to
Interesting.
note
I
that as
love
well.
that.
That adds to
Definitely.
like the natural, adds to
Yeah.
the natural feel that they had going, the rhythm.
'Cause it
Yeah.
really does have, like, a super raw and authentic, like, dialogue and everything. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Best screenplay. There you go.
Hmm. What's your favorite
Um,
shot?
yeah, my favorite shot. Um, you know what it is? And it's a weird one. It's not even, like, well known in the movie, but maybe because 'cause I'm a former swimmer, like a hardcore swimmer. I told you guys this last time.
Yeah.
This shot when he's swimming, and it's underwater, and he doesn't hear anything, and he just sees I think they're doing water aerobics, the ladies, the Japanese ladies.
Yeah,
They're just
yeah.
hopping up and
Hmm.
down, and it's almost like he's disconnected from it because he's in the zone swimming, but he also feels the disconnect of I don't know, I think it says a lot because he feels so disconnected from the culture, even though he's in the same pool with them. And it's
Yeah.
like he's sharing this moment of exercise, but he can't connect with them at all. And it's like they're almost kind of like leaping away from him in some sort of way. And it's
Mhm.
this metaphor of like the entire meaning of this film of being lost in translation. I don't know. It just meant a lot to me as a swimmer. I was like, oh, I feel that. I felt that.
Mm.
So that's my favorite. But anyway, before we move on to break, we have to talk about her most famous movie ever,
Yeah.
Marie
One of
Antoinette,
them.
which
Hmm.
premiered, I believe it premiered at Cannes. And I think people didn't like it at Cannes, if I
Yeah,
remember right.
I think people have mixed feelings about it in general.
Yeah,
I Sabrina, what are
Well,
your
to
thoughts?
start
me,
with you.
I haven't seen it. Yeah, I haven't seen it in a long time, and it's probably, other than visually, I think it's one of her most unforgettable works. So it's something that I have not revisited probably since I got into Sofia Coppola, like,
Mhm,
years ago. So
You mean
mhm.
forgettable, right? Is this something that you love and that you can't? It's always stayed with you, or
no,
are you?
literally the opposite, just visually. But I don't know, at the time, I didn't really enjoy it that much, and then I haven't gone back, which I would
So
really like to.
Yeah,
so to be fair, this is a period piece, so it's not up your lane, RB3. I know that. Um,
Too.
but I also believe that
Yeah.
a lot of the disconnect between the audience in Cannes, a French audience, and this is an a period piece of like 18th century France, and her kind of disregard for historical accuracy might be a little
yeah,
sensitive to people in France. And her
yeah. I
use
think
of, like, modern songs being blasted in your face was a bit
I think
much.
that's
Yeah.
I think the songs are the biggest thing. I think
Those
that's what
are
really
loud.
divides people. And I think it kind of to me it kind of took me out of the movie too. Even when I
Yeah,
ever since
it's the
that's been
Suicide
my
Squad.
only real beef. Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, I mean, the songs are used the songs are used way better in Marie Antoinette than in Suicide Squad. Don't
That's true.
doubt that. But I think what people criticize the usage of modern music in this kind of like period piece movie is just the fact that like she's taking this historical, noteworthy figure, and then transforming her into a more it's transforming that story into a modern day angsty teenage coming of age film.
Yeah.
Whether that choice is something that people enjoy, people don't enjoy, I think that's to each their own. I think it's interesting in idea. I don't know in execution if it really landed for me all of that hard. But that being said, the actual story of Marie Antoinette is like really, really interesting. And she was like this dictatorial um, presence, but then she also had this extreme fantasization of like not having wealth, which again is something that we see in a lot of Sofia Coppola films, as up until this point, with Lost in Translation, with we're going to talk about with Somewhere and Bling Ring and The Big Owl, like it's like these figures who are so um, bored and mundane with upper middle class slash rich lifestyle that they partake a poor kind of sensibility just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting in that she chose to make that figure, that historical figure, and that's the connection I
Yeah.
think she had to her.
I mean, I think what she was trying to do was show kind of the idea of like teenage girlhood is timeless, and it could be similar to a modern teenage girl to this, timeless figure of Marie Antoinette. And
Mhm.
I don't know. Again, I'm gonna see Little Women, but I almost feel like Greta Gerwig might have done a better job of this same message of showing the teenage girlhood being timeless throughout time and kind of having those struggles. Am I wrong in that or no?
Oh, no, I 100% agree with you. Taking on a period piece and then modernizing it doesn't have to be making this like super angsty,
Yeah.
going overboard type of thing. And there's a line to toe here, because then it just reaches a certain point of like, yeah, just not really connecting
Yeah,
as
silly,
much.
right? Almost like
Yeah.
a silliness.
Yeah, a little bit, and that's how Little Women did a lot better of a job, which you still have to watch. I'm gonna hold that against you
I will watch
until you
it.
watch it.
Last thing about this movie is we can't ignore the fact that the cinematography is just wild. Like it's so freaking good. It's
Yeah,
at
Mhm.
least me. I don't know. RB3, you seem like you don't agree,
100%.
but
No, I do agree. No, I
okay,
100%
okay.
agree.
I mean, it's just a really well shot movie. And again, this is coming from a period piece fan. I love this stuff, and it's still shot like quality stuff. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed visually what they were doing. Everything else to me just didn't work.
yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
exactly what I said earlier. That's the stuff that I remember about this movie, and the rest is just, and then like angsty punk music, and then the rest is just kind of like, I don't know. I haven't revisited it since, but
All
yeah,
right, all right.
totally get it. Alrighty,
yeah,
guys. After the break, we're gonna be getting into the rest of her film, starting with Somewhere, then Bling Ring, and obviously The Big Isle. So make sure you guys stick around.
This ain't funny, so don't you dare laugh. With the 4/5 divide you in half. You getting at me equals a bloodbath. You do the math, take you out the equation.
Check out Sabrina's review of The Invisible Man, available exclusively on First Cut. Enjoy.
Lee Wanell digs deep under our skin with his beautiful writing and directing, completely immersing us into the world of our main character, again, played by Elizabeth Moss. She completely shines in this role. I think she gave one of the most haunting performances since Toni Collette in Hereditary. We feel her exhaustion, her claustrophobia, her fear. It's just completely palpable. It's one of those performances that is extremely, extremely special. I was really blown away as to how Wanell kind of created this atmosphere of tension, especially with our villain being invisible. It's interesting the way he uses the spaces in the frames and like the voids in the shots to scare us. We feel that claustrophobia. We feel like he's anywhere and everywhere, nowhere, kind of all at once.
Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? We're back talking about Sofia Coppola. Now let's get into the latter half of her films, starting with 2010's movie called Somewhere, starring Stephen Dorff and Elle Fanning. We got that right now. And this is it's a very different movie. Talk to me about this one, RB3. I know you're a fan of it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Somewhere. It's one of my favorite recent movies that I think I've especially the last decade. I think it really speaks to like this quiet mundaneness that has been transparent throughout a lot of Sofia Coppola's filmography, but I think is really prevalent here. The idea of having this famed Hollywood actor who's kind of living vicariously, with a rich lifestyle, but kind of just overwhelmingly bored with like regular life, and how bringing his daughter into the equation, who he's been kind of back and forth on seeing throughout her entire life. He starts to reevaluate what life truly means. Is it more than just being there? Is it more than just being there for yourself, or is the purpose of life to be in service of someone else, or to be connected with someone else? So it deals with a lot of really prevalent things that I think are just really, really interesting and cool and fun. So I overall, this is one of the more unique films in Sofia Coppola's filmography, but it's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah. Sabrina?
Yeah, that's really cool. It's definitely, from all of what you've said, that makes me want to check it out. You know, I saw it on Netflix, I think, at one point, and I probably watched it in passing. That is why I'm so bad with streaming. And so this entire like movie theaters being shut down and only resorting to streaming has kind of been a struggle for me. It's hard to not look at my phone when I'm watching something. So some of the stuff I've seen on Netflix throughout the past few years, I just kind of, they don't really stick with me. So that's unfortunate, but I'll definitely try to check that one out again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one is a very I feel like it might be one of Sofia Coppola's most different films, at least what she's shown us before. First of all, elephant in the room, we have to start out with the fact that it starts a dude, which is not something that's super common in all her films. And yeah, you're right. It definitely deals with the whole Hollywood aspect as far as almost like a dual life that Steven Dorff's character has as an actor, where he has one life and he's one way with his daughter, and then he's in his different mundane, kind of going with the motions as far as a Hollywood lifestyle perspective on his other life. And it's kind of him trying to deal with the two and kind of bring the two together. It's very different because it feels like visually, for example, I feel like it's the most minimal of Sophia's films as far as what's in the frame, the use of color. It feels like most of it is in a hotel room, a crappy hotel room, with the white walls, with the one bed, and it feels like it doesn't have a lot visually telling you as far as color wise and as far as framing wise. So I feel like that's so different for her. And I almost feel like she's pushing herself to do that and challenging herself, especially coming off Marie Antoinette when there's so much in the frame and there's so much color. The buildings, the architecture is all there to help her
Right.
as a DP and as a visual storyteller. That's the first thing that I have to say about this film, and it
Well,
really stands out.
I think towards the beginning of the film, and I think this film is very interesting in a lot of ways because it is very visually, it is very visually heavy. But I think in the beginning of the film, you see like the colors and the templates go to represent
Yeah,
the more luxurious lifestyle that this character is living, like the fancy hotel rooms and the fountains and the LA scenery. But after a while, it presents it almost so much that it feels like there's a stillness to it after a while. Like it feels like there's no movement, there's no energy to it. And it goes into, as we talked about with Virgin Suicides, how Sofia Coppola's style is very much invoking of the character's like individual emotion. The emotion
yeah,
of this film goes to express the boredom that is presented all throughout this character's kind of lifestyle. Um, but then, the daughter character is played by Elle Fanning. And, we're talking about how, this is mostly male set perspective, but, the daughter plays an instrumental part in Stephen Dorff's character development too, largely because I think a lot of that is due to the fact that Sofia Coppola herself is the daughter of a famous Hollywood director. She's probably basing a lot of the experiences in this movie based on a lot of her experiences growing up. So I think overall, I think this movie feels very personal. I think it's probably one of the lower rated films on her filmography, from at least according to IMDb or whatever. But I think a big part of that is because it has this kind of raw naturalism. Like I said, the first 15 minutes don't really have a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of improvising that's going on, but it's really about a lot of the silence and stillness that happens in awkward relationships between father and daughter, especially when they're kind of like estranged. So it's really deep, it's really personal, and I applaud Sofia Coppola for doing this one. And I think, for what it's worth, even though it does present like a very unique perspective that I'm not used to seeing in her films, I do appreciate that it has it presents a different layer to a filmography that we've become so familiar with over the years.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get into I think it's the Bling Ring, right? That's the next one we have to
Bling
talk
ring.
about.
Yeah.
This movie, first of all, the trailer is the first thing I have to mention, considering that
The
the trailer
Azalea
was,
Banks, hey,
yeah, you're
well,
right.
212
Yep.
music. That's what I'm talking
212. Yep.
about. Yeah.
Yo, shout out to Azalea Banks, man. Emma Watson, uh, coming off Harry Potter, that's a
Yeah.
standout, at least for me. Um, and the fact that this movie is based on a Vanity Fair article, I forget the name of it, but it's something, kids steal Louis Vuittons or they wore Louis Vuittons. Um, and it's based on a true story of these teenagers who went around Hollywood robbing celebrities' homes and walking away with, I believe, 3 million in clothes and jewelry from these like celebrities, notably Paris Hilton,
Mm-hmm.
when she
I feel
was
like Orlando Bloom too.
Orlando Bloom, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that is kind of this movie. I mean, obviously, it still has a lot of visual style coming from Sophia, but plot wise, it's so different than what she's done before.
Yeah.
And at the same time, kind of similar to what she's done before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Talk to me about this movie, Sabrina.
So I actually, at the time that the Bling Ring actually happened, I was pretty young, and my mom was obsessed with those like People, In Touch, all those like magazines. So I remember reading about, I believe one of the girls, I don't know if she is in like the movie, whatever, Alexis Nyers. She ended up having her own like E-News television show and everything. She just blew up from all this stuff, which is so crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
But so I think the story is insane, and I applaud Sofia Coppola for kind of taking it on. Whether I think she is the most effective choice for this story, that is definitely a debate that I'm willing to have with you guys. Just because, again, I think she loses. I think she loses a lot of like what she is as a filmmaker, a little bit, because it just isn't effective with this type of story. There's like the sense of like detachment and stuff like that we normally see in her work. It's just like, and like all the dreamlike kind of like stylistic choices she has in this one, it just isn't effective, I believe.
Interesting. RB3?
Well, this film does depart a little bit from. I think it plays into her style a lot, and also departs a lot too, right? It This is one of, at least on a visual perspective, I believe this movie was either shot on the red cameras or
Yeah, it was digital.
It definitely looks. You could tell it was digital, and it has that very digital,
yeah,
kind of aesthetic that is very different than a lot of her other films. So it kind of stands out on that perspective. And then also the tone is very different than a lot of her films. I mean, a lot of her movies are a lot more like quiet, mature. Some would say, some would maybe argue boring. I wouldn't argue that.
Subtle. I would say subtle.
Subtle. And this movie is not as subtle. I think it is. I think it is subtle in a lot of ways. I think the way they handle the robbery scenes are kind of stylized in a way that makes it a lot more subtle. They have that like one kind of long zoom in shot for the one robbery scene with through the glass window that I thought was really interesting. It does it in a different way that's not like this heightened kind of action movie kind of idea of like a heist or whatever. it's more of like a art house interpretation of
Yeah.
like this burglarizing stuff or whatever. So I enjoy this movie. It's not the greatest. I think it goes up and down. I think the ending is a little cooked. I don't know. I think they could have used a little more to it, and I think
Yeah.
It addresses the common theme that we see throughout Sofia Coppola's filmography of like the theme of like rich people or upper middle class people being bored with like normal society,
Yeah.
so they pursue avenues that really poor people would want to pursue their lifestyles as. And this movie is a perfect example of that. The idea of like these rich teenagers break into people's houses just for the sake of boredom. That's just what they want to do for the sake of adrenaline and thrill. When in reality, a lot of times home invasions or burglaries are coming from people in desperate situations. So it's just interesting that this movie kind of portrays it in more of a like more of a whimsical kind of way. But
Yeah.
in total, I mean, I have I think this was also one of the early A24 movies, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yeah,
this,
it was.
yeah,
Wow, you're right.
yeah, and
Mhm.
it came out. I know this and Spring Breakers came out like relatively close to each other.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spring Breakers, I think to me at least, and I think a lot of people might agree or disagree, that Spring Breakers has a much more, I guess, bold, explosive
Mhm.
theme behind it than this movie does. This movie just kind of has the one thing of like class behind it that kind of speaks to it, but Spring Breakers might speak to a little more. I think them coming out closer to around each other's time and having a kind of similar-ish marketing campaign um, did a disparity to how people perceive the movie a little bit too. So,
Mm.
uh,
Yeah. I mean, my thing about this movie too that I think stands out quite a bit. You mentioned that this is her only film that's shot on digital, which is fascinating, considering so many things. But you know what I find interesting, just having a conversation with you guys right now, talking about Sofia Coppola, is the fact that almost all her movies have to do with almost this outsider perspective, whether it's Lost in Translation, Virgin Suicides, all these movies
Mhm.
have to do Marie Antoinette
right.
with and in this perspective, it's kind of like you said, RB3, almost this class issue of these teenagers with their boredom kind of going after the not even the rich but the celebrities, right, which is almost a
Mhm.
different style of rich because it's so in your face of how rich they are, and it's how Sophia deals with that perspective coming from their point of view. That's the biggest thing that stands out to me, and obviously visually the lights, the lighting, the neon lights, the color lights, the fact that it looks like it's shot on digital, like you said, RB3.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting the way that she really leaned into the whole aspect of like this modern young perspective of this generation that is really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it just goes to show. I mean, I think especially during a time where movies like I said, Spring Breakers coming out, The Social Network came out during this time, and also
Yeah.
we mentioned Gia Coppola as well. Her film Palo Alto also came out in 2013 and had a similar kind of aesthetic. So
Mhm.
you kind of see like this interweaving kind of general digitally driven theme that represents like young culture that I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely
Any last words, Sabrina?
a standout for me is Emma Watson's performance. That is the best part of the movie to me. I
Mhm.
love her performance so much.
I love Emma
And
Watson, so you don't have
yeah,
to convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
yeah,
Only one
that's
who
the thing.
likes Beauty and the Beast. You like Beauty and the Beast,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
I
yeah.
love Beauty
you
and the
liked
Beast,
it?
bro. That's my yeah. Oh, I love that movie. Oh yeah. Well, what's that judgment, yo? What's that judgment for?
No, no judgment. It's just yeah, like it's okay. She
Nah,
was not
nah.
casted right. She was not. She should not have been casted as Belle. Come on.
Yo, get that out of here, bro. Hermione Granger for life, man.
Nah, that
Yeah.
auto tune's a little too much. I'm just
I
throwing shade right
love
now.
it. I love every single Disney live action, pretty much, except for maybe Lion King was okay. But everything else I love.
Mhm.
So maybe just because I saw it
Aladdin?
with my. Oh, are you kidding
He
me?
loves Aladdin. I know. I don't understand it. I
I
don't
saw
get
that
it.
like 20 times.
Are you
I don't get it.
serious?
Yeah.
All
It's
right,
I
I'm
think
hanging up, guys.
it's
Bye. It
fun.
was good. It was
Yeah.
good knowing you guys. Goodbye.
By the way, I forgot to mention Sofia Coppola's, frequent collaborator Kristen Dunst
Yeah.
has a cameo in
Yeah,
this movie too.
Mary
As one of
Jade.
the, yeah. So it's good to see her kind of find a way to sneak into a cameo into
Yeah.
this film plan herself.
Oh,
Yeah.
and Paris Hilton's in this too, in that cameo.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually use
Yeah,
Paris Hilton's real house um,
yeah,
to be
Yeah,
from
that's really
those
cool.
breakup scenes. So
yeah. Quit your
Yeah,
hating,
I think this.
Sabrina.
Well, I
This
think
movie's a joke.
hey, I
I'm playing.
actually I like.
Yeah,
I know. I actually do like this movie though. Just compared to everything else, compared to Lost in Translation and The Virgin Suicides, for me, it's just not top tier Sofia Coppola. But
yeah,
like, I really do admire what she was doing, kind of getting this like snapshot of that generation, that like early 2000, like early mid 2000s, like paparazzi, low rise jeans. Like she gets it. She did it.
yeah.
So I do admire
For
that a lot, and
sure.
I do think it's a fun movie. I just don't think her style kind of serves the story
Sure.
as well as it would have maybe with somebody else.
Yeah.
yeah,
All right, let's move on. So the last movies I have on my list are two. Um, I haven't seen A Very Merry Christmas. I'm sorry. Uh,
yeah.
I I didn't
Is that
grow
the
up.
Bill Murray thing?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, it's the
Sofia
Bill Murray
Coppola.
I didn't see that
Christmas.
either.
If I'm being real, and I know a lot of white dudes are gonna be mad at me. Um, I'm not the biggest Bill Murray guy either. Um, I just didn't grow up with him. So let's move on to The Beguiled.
Yeah. No, to the Bill Murray point, I think I became more familiar with him through both Groundhog's Day and through his work with Wes Anderson. I think his
Mm,
work with Wes Anderson, I
Yeah.
got to him a
mm.
lot of that, which we
That's
should
a
be planning to do a Wes Anderson. He's got
oh
a movie,
yeah,
right?
her movie's
He's
coming
got a
out.
movie
Yes.
coming out. Yeah, you like
Yeah,
French
what
Dispatch.
you
Yeah.
like Wes Anderson? Yeah. I'm down to talk Wes Anderson.
yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
Wes Anderson would be a two-parter. I feel like that's like a lot.
There's a lot to go through. I mean, all of his 10 movies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We got like 10
I'm
movies.
with it. Let's do it.
That'd be a two-parter, and I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% down for a two-parter for that film. So,
So
um,
the last one I have is The Beguiled.
yeah,
And I want to go straight to you, RB3. This one won her first thing. This won her Best Director, I believe, at Cannes.
mhm.
Um,
Second
which is
female to ever do it.
that's huge. I mean,
Yeah.
right off the bat. And now everything else I'm gonna throw onto you. This is about a Union soldier who gets
Mhm.
stranded on like this female boarding school in Mississippi. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it's like a boarding school. Yeah, it's probably a boarding school. It's like a Union soldier gets stuck in like Confederate grounds, and then
Yeah,
these,
and it's
yeah,
all women.
it's all women who are left in this house. All the slaves have ran away. So it's just these four women. And then it becomes them taking in this Union soldier and how his kind of influence kind of makes them all start acting crazy towards each other. It
Yeah,
becomes like a psychological thriller, by the end of it. It's super interesting. It's based. They had a previous version of this movie that I believe came out in the '70s that was starred Clint Eastwood, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah.
Uh,
This is like a graphic novel. Am I right, or is it a novel?
I think it might be a novel. I think it might be a
Yeah,
novel. Um, but like I said, they had a version that they made in the '70s, and then and it deals with, again another Sofia Coppola movie that deals with the concept um, of boredom, of lavish lifestyle in an isolated environment. Um, what that does to the human mind, to the female mind, and I think much like Virgin Suicides, this also kind of deals with the confluence of what a man's influence is on that kind of sense of isolation to women characters, to female characters, and what that drives them to do. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how um, how well it communicates those themes. I mean,
Can dive into that, because I know you said this movie was controversial, especially at USC. Can you tell me why?
yeah, I mean, I just had a class at USC. I had a couple classes. I believe I don't know if it was this was on. I had a different classes with one that was focused on race, class, and gender. I don't know if we studied it there or we studied it in postmodern, but either way, we saw the movie on the big screen. We had a discussion afterwards, and a lot of people were not like really vibing with what this movie had was this movie A was had to say and B what it was doing in general. Um, a lot of people, some people found it just right out straight out boring. Other people found it to be um, a more I guess I'm saying this with like a lack of better terms, but uh, some people found it to be like a white feminism crusade or whatever, you know. Um, there's a lot of different criticisms that were levied against this movie, especially with the fact that it is set immediately after the Civil War, which was about slavery, and yet this featured no African American characters. That being said, the original book did have a half black, half white slave who was a participant in the story that Sofia Coppola completely cut out. And I believe in some of her interviews, she talked about taking that character out of the story because the movie that she was trying to make wasn't addressing race; it was addressing gender. So she didn't want to have that kind of presence interfere in I guess the story as well. So there's a lot of arguments levied, like in favor of and um, against this movie. But it's
Yeah.
one of the more interesting pieces for sure.
Can I hear your thoughts on that? And I'm sorry, I'm going to go to you, Sabrina.
Oh no, all good. Oh, right now?
My thoughts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Or
no, I just want to hear
No, yeah, yeah.
your actual thoughts. You saw the movie versus Sabrina and I. To be completely honest, I haven't seen the movie, and I don't think
Sofia
Sabrina
Coppola
has either. So this is kind of your show, RB3. What are your thoughts on this movie, man? Because you kind of told us
um,
everyone else's thoughts.
yeah, I don't know. I see. This is. I don't. This is. It's interesting, right? Because I think for me, I don't. I kind of just look at the movie as like the movie, right? Like the text that was given to us, right? And the text that was given to us, it was well executed. I mean, it does dissolve into this whole thing of I mean, the plot goes in the way the plot goes. But the first time I watched the movie, it wasn't an initial thought of mine that jumped out about the racial component of it. I mean, that just wasn't my initial thought when I watched it.
Sure.
I just thought it was a story about the story. So seeing that be an argument that people use for and against the movie, it's kind of like I don't know how much that actually plays into it. Again, I haven't watched the 1970s version and I haven't read the novel, so maybe the aspect there plays a much bigger part into the story. But at least for the story I saw, I guess I could see why they would do that. But at the same time,
Yeah.
it's like, at the same time, it's like kind of I kind of empathize with the argument of not having any address of I do sympathize with the argument of not addressing race too. I do sympathize with that argument because, like, at the end of the day, that is the spark, the impetus of a lot of
Yeah.
these events, and it's not even addressed even through like dialogue or any of that nature. So it would have been interesting to see that perspective represented, but I've never had any issues with that movie personally. I just haven't.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would be interested to watch it again through those lenses.
Yeah.
But I remember it just being such a big like discussion and topic piece. This is one of those few things that RB3 has a take for everything, but this is one of those few things that I didn't really have a take for back then, and I honestly don't know where I would stand in it now, other than to say that I think the acting is really well done in the movie. It's shot really, really well. It's probably one of the most beautifully shot Sofia Coppola movies. We've seen
And that's
her
saying a lot.
Oh wow.
Yeah, definitely. Stories. Period pieces always confuse me anyway, so it's tough to even like hook me in to begin with. But I was hooked. But I think the way it concludes in the way that is a little weird. I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed what this movie had to present, and I enjoyed the performances, and I enjoyed like the theme and the place that it represents and her overall filmography. But other than
Yeah.
that, you know, I have
It's
no problem
so
with
it's so interesting. What a way to end this episode on The Beguiled, right?
it. Right,
Because it's
right,
a
right.
movie that, again, we haven't all seen, so we can't have an opinion on it. Uh, if I'm being honest, the reason why I was like rubbing my head and doing all this stuff for anyone that's watching is not because of your argument. It's simply because of a conversation that Sabrina and I had that I
I was
honestly
literally going to say
feel
that, yeah.
that we can't ignore it. I really didn't want to bring it up. I didn't. I swear to you guys, whoever's listening, I didn't want to bring this up. But when I went through the Sofia Coppola train of movies, besides this one, obviously, because I haven't seen it, I was watching her movies, I was reading her story. The thing I kept running through my head was the fact that I just don't feel like I'm trying to be as delicate as I can. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, do your thing.
The fact that she is Hollywood royalty, right? We can't ignore the fact that she is kind of privileged to be this powerful director and this prominent female staple inside Hollywood still comes kind of from that word that you just used, RB3, white feminism aspect of the way it's like, yeah, women. And by women, I mean, if you're white, rich, and your dad has made a lot of movies. And it's like, you know, so far we've done 2 episodes this month on female directors, and they happen to be Greta Gerwig and Sofia Coppola. Like, I just feel like it's hard for me to get over the fact that it's like, can we not can we acknowledge this at least? I don't know. I'm not saying it's bad or good or it takes away anything from her art because she's an artist. I'm just saying it's there and we can't ignore it. And the fact that there's other female directors who are African American, Latina, Asian who are struggling and don't have the same opportunity as someone with the last name Coppola and who's, a white woman.
What a way to end the episode.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Everyone's like, oh
No,
no,
I
how
get it
could you
though. It
say
is
that?
I said this with when we were doing the Greta Gerwig episode. I said that it is a very important conversation to be had, of course, because when you're ignoring it, that's when the problem is never it's never addressed. It never comes to light when people just ignore it. It's just going to continue being the same way it was.
I think very recently we've seen a huge rise in African American women storytellers, Latinx women storytellers, Asian American and Asian storytellers, Asian women storytellers in general. And I think that's something that is progressing through the industry. Unfortunately, right now, not a lot of those directors have the same kind of filmography. Obviously, we have the Ava DuVernay episode that she's had a substantial amount of films that are worth talking about and discussing and evaluating. We have a few voices in Hollywood that are starting to rise to prominence who are women of color, but it's still an evolving process that's like taking a lot of time to catch up to. So it's tough. It's like an interesting back and forth that we as a society have to kind of like deal with during this time.
That's what
and
Sabrina and I talked about too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and with what's happening, because obviously Greta Gerwig is a newer face in all of this, so she's kind of leading the charge currently for women. Sofia Coppola did it a little bit before, but yeah, again, they're telling stories that are so particular to them, because I hear a lot of people say like, oh, Gerwig cast no people of color. And like, yes, that is definitely a problem in something like Lady Bird in Sacramento. I know there's Hispanic people there. So it definitely is something that needs to be addressed. And we are very fortunate because right now we're getting all these amazing, as you said, amazing female filmmakers. Melina Matsoukas, just this past year, Lulu Wang, even Alma Harrell, who is a white woman, but just for some reason, I feel like the ability she had with Shia and getting a bunch of other female filmmakers behind the camera, they had a diverse group of females. So that's somebody who is using their position of power for something really good, even though she is a white female filmmaker. But yeah, I agree.
Right.
No, I mean that's what we concluded, Sabrina, last time we talked about this, was the fact that there is and they're on the come up, man. We can't ignore
Yeah.
Celine Sciamma. We can't ignore Lulu Wang. All
Hmm.
these directors who are women of color and who are on the come up. I'm just, still kind of disappointed that there isn't a larger filmography for us to tackle. Even if I'm being real, full disclosure to anyone listening, before we even had this conversation, I was saying, I want to do more female directors, and I want to talk about several of them, just because. But there's not enough filmography there for us to make a full
Yeah.
episode, and those are the things that personally I find disappointing, because
Mhm.
I want to be able to talk about Lulu Wang and Celine Sciamma and all these other great women of color who are making beautiful movies and are starting to lead the charge. But unfortunately, it's just the start. Fortunately, it's just the start, but unfortunately, it's just the start, because we don't
Yeah.
have those 30, 40, 20 years of female directing excellence and quality and awards and attention they deserve to have. And it's something to be said, I guess, to conclude our Women's March Female Director Month,
Yeah,
is that
that's a good way to
we
end it.
have to focus on, yes, the success that we're seeing now, but also highlight women of color who are telling stories that are not the same as the female directors we've seen before. It's just not the
Mhm.
same. And I think it's important to say that, especially to end out this month and this episode.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, 100%.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
I
No,
and
definitely.
I
The rise. This is. We're just gonna keep talking over each other. The rise of female filmmakers that we've seen in the past few years is incredibly encouraging, incredibly inspiring. Just to see these people getting to tell stories that we weren't able to see for the past few decades. Um, it makes me really, really happy, and I cannot. I know we mentioned this with the Greta Gerwig episode. I cannot wait to see what like Lulu Wang, um, Alma Harrell, Melina Matsoukas. I can't wait to see what they have coming up, and all the other female filmmakers and women of color filmmakers kind of like on the rise,
yeah.
coming up in the next. But luckily, we have we have more opportunity. It's getting better. It's getting
It,
better. Like we're still nowhere where it needs to be, but it is getting better. So that's something I guess to celebrate.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
RB3.
that's definitely something to celebrate. And I think, I want to give another shout out to Ava DuVernay. I did this during her episode
Yeah.
too, but I do want to, her show Queen Sugar. Every single episode is directed by a woman. Um, Most of them, I think over 50% of them, are directed by women of color. So that's
That is
great
amazing.
to see that there's a whole TV show that's promoting that. I think in the TV world, we're seeing a lot of interesting, great female directors who are rising to prominence. I think of Watchmen as another episode, as another show that we covered, where I think about 4 or 5 of the episodes were directed by women.
I was literally looking it up. Watchmen right now
Mhm.
won the best directing Emmy, was a woman.
Yeah, right,
The
right.
episode. I
Yeah,
forget her
yeah,
name.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's powerful. I mean, that goes to show that stories don't need to necessarily be just one kind of voice, and it doesn't need to be, even if it's something that's comic book centric or superhero centric, it doesn't just have to be a female directing a female based superhero movie, or a female directing a rom com or something like that. There should be a diversity and having female talent and female voices representing all kinds of genres. So I'm excited to
And
see that progress over the next few years.
And you pointed something out, RB3, the fact that TV, people ignore TV directing. Like TV acting is still popular, TV ratings are skyrocketing, but TV directing still goes ignored. And there's a ton, and I mean a ton, of female TV directors. Like you just said, Watchmen is a perfect example. I think it might have been the DGA, not the Emmy.
Mhm.
But either way, DGA, that's almost even better.
Yeah.
The fact that they are getting recognized, and like you said, Watchmen is a great example of that. And I can name so many other shows that have female directors behind the camera. I mean, even When They See Us, for crying out loud, is one of the best things I've
Mhm.
ever seen anywhere.
Yep.
And it is directed by Ava DuVernay, like you just said, and she makes it a point to give the opportunity, especially during a TV episode, which is just as important and just as difficult as a movie, but much shorter. and it gives them the chance to showcase their skills. So great mentions, RB3. Great shout outs.
Thank you.
Yeah. Already, I think that's it. What a way to end it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry for whoever was like, yeah, I'm vibing with this. Oh no. What's this? Where did this come from?
Rice, like,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But either way, guys, thank you so much for listening to the Meeting Of podcast. Again, we're going to try and figure out this way, figure out my whole situation, everyone's situation as far as where they're at and where they're currently sitting at. We'll make it work
going the entire time.
Yeah, exactly. We'll make it work is what I'm trying to say. And hopefully we'll be captivating, entertaining, and enjoyable for you guys, because that's what we want to be. And yeah, for the Meeting Of podcast, I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
And we're peacing out, guys.